We've all heard of this guy and the network of evil that he was a part of, but before his crimes were exposed to the world, another monster named Marc Dutroux was doing similar things in Belgium during the mid-1990s, ending the lives of some of his victims. Some say that he was part of a larger network that involved government officials and law enforcement. The Belgian people heard these claims and looked at the fact that he had taken the lives of their children after he had already been convicted of abducting and doing disgusting things to 5 girls ranging from 11 to 19 in 1989. At the time, he served only 3 years for the heinous crimes committed with his wife and another man named Jean Van Peteghem as accomplices. How did authorities miss that the parolee was keeping girls in a dungeon under his home where 2 of his victims were eventually found when he was arrested in 1996? Was someone looking out for him and protecting what he was doing? Enough people thought so that there were demonstrations in the streets after his arrest for a slew of horrific crimes, including 5 homicides. And get this, he's already up for parole. Marc Dutroux was born on November 6, 1956, in the capital city of Brussels as the first of 5 children to Janine and Victor Dutroux. His father was a teacher and for a while after Marc was born, moved the family to Burundi, a small nation in Central Africa south of Rwanda that was at the time controlled by Belgium. They moved back to Belgium after Burundi gained its independence in 1962. The family settled in Obai where Marc finished school. He claims that both his parents and teachers mistreated him throughout his childhood, and perhaps as a result of this familial dysfunction, his parents divorced in 1972 when Marc was 16 years old. After finishing school, Dutroux went to work as an electrician, and it seems like he had a relatively normal life at this point, or at least he was able to hide any creepy activities. In 1976, Marc married his first wife, Françoise Dubois. The couple had 2 children, but it was not a happy marriage. Dutroux was abusive to Françoise, leading to a divorce in 1983, with her taking both kids. While they were still married, Dutroux left his job as an electrician and started making money selling scrap metal and trafficking in stolen car parts. His legal trouble began on paper in 1979. Marc would be arrested for a variety of low-level crimes, with the worst being assault. Marc himself was the victim of an assault stemming from his habit of going to the local skating rink and deliberately crashing into women and girls in order to grope them. One man saw this happen repeatedly to his girlfriend and took action. The courts did find the man guilty of assault and battery. However, it was clear enough that Marc had been doing something inappropriate to provoke the attack, and he was banned from the skating rink. Aside from these creepy activities, it seems that Marc was making a decent amount of money. Between trafficking in narcotics and stolen cars, the creature was able to buy a total of 7 houses, 3 of which would be used for his disgusting activities. In 1983, he was accused of attacking a 50-year-old woman, but their charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. The first of his known abductions occurred in 1985. His second wife, Michelle Martin, would say that he had told her it was too tedious to pick up women, and that it was easier to just take them off the street. That year, he went on a kidnapping spree, leaving one to wonder whether these were truly the first or if there are other earlier victims. Dutroux's first known victim was a girl referred to in court documents as Sylvie D., whom he kidnapped with accomplice Jean Van Peteghem and Michelle Martin. They established what would become a routine of abduction and abuse, taking her to a garage in Rue and doing horrible things to her, and documenting the ordeal with Polaroid pictures. Thankfully, these early victims survived the horrific experience. Unfortunately, there would be several more in this first series of evil. 19-year-old Maria V. was abducted on October 17, 1985, from a town in western Belgium called Parennes-les-Binches. When she went to authorities to report what had happened to her, she described her assailants as 3 men. These would turn out to be Dutroux, Peteghem, and an older third man who was not identified. On the 14th of December, the gang kidnapped a girl named Axel D. Her report to police would lead to the creepy crew's discovery and arrest. Peteghem was luckily quite stupid and would tell girls a lot about the crimes and personal details about himself and his accomplices, which Axel took immediately to police when she was free. Unfortunately, they were not able to stop Dutroux before the group could kidnap 2 more girls. Just days after attacking Axel, the group kidnapped a 15-year-old girl named Elizabeth G. in Ponticelles. Once again, they would abuse the girl while Dutroux documented the crime on film. A month later, on January 17, 1986, Dutroux and at least one unknown accomplice kidnapped an 18-year-old girl named Catherine B. in Obey. During this time, Peteghem was stationed in Germany with the military and so could not have taken part in this crime. The victims had been reporting the heinous acts and police were zeroing in on the culprits. Even so, it was over a year from the last known kidnapping before the group was arrested. In February of 1987, Dutroux, Martin, and Peteghem were arrested for the 5 kidnappings, with Marc also getting charged with a robbery. Despite the heinous nature of what they had done, the sentences they received seemed way too short. Dutroux received 13.5 years, Martin 5 years, and Peteghem only 6.5 years. While he was incarcerated, Marc would be deemed disabled and would receive financial assistance to the tune of $1,200 a month, as well as sedatives. To make matters worse, the Minister of Justice, Melchior Wathelet, granted Dutroux early release against the recommendations of the prison psychiatrist and the prosecutor in the case. After serving less than a quarter of his sentence, Dutroux was released in 1992. He returned to his homes and wealth while still receiving government assistance. The extremely short sentence did not hamper the evil that was inside him, and soon he resumed his disgusting practices. On June 24, 1995, 2 8-year-old girls named Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo were kidnapped while walking and brought to Dutroux's home in Marcinelle, where he had built a personal dungeon to keep his victims. 2 months later, while the 2 girls were still in captivity, Dutroux went in search of more victims. On August 23rd in Ostend, the creature and accomplice Michel Lelever came across 2 teenage girls, Anne Marchal and Yves J. Lambrex, on their way home from a night out. The girls were taken back to the Dutroux home, and with the dungeon already occupied, they were instead chained up in a bedroom. They would remain there enduring the depravities of their captors until September, when Dutroux and another accomplice named Bernard Weinstein drugged the girls using the medication given to Marc by the government, and drove them to Jumet, where the girls were buried alive. While this was going on, the other criminal activities of those associated with Dutroux were ongoing. Around the same time that Marchal and Lambrex lost their lives, Weinstein and another man had stolen a van, which was discovered by police. With the attention on him because of the theft, Dutroux decided to eliminate Weinstein to avoid a continued investigation, and buried him alive at one of his properties after torturing him into revealing where he kept his money. All this time, the 2 young girls, Lejeune and Russo, were still being held at Marc's home, able to move throughout the house at times. But on December 6, 1995, Dutroux was arrested for auto theft. Yet somehow, authorities did not search his properties for stolen goods or captives, despite his earlier arrest for kidnapping. While he was away, he asked Michelle Martin to feed the girls, who had been once more locked in the basement dungeon. But Martin claimed that she was too afraid that they would attack her if she did so, and so the girls were left to starve. Dutroux would later initially claim that they had been alive when he was released on March 20, 1996, but that Lejeune had passed away that same day, and Russo only 4 days later. However, during his trial, Dutroux changed his story, saying that both girls were deceased when he got home from jail. An expert witness would agree that this was more likely based on the amount of food and water that Martin said she had given them. In any case, the girls had passed away, and so Dutroux buried them in the yard of the same property that he had buried Weinstein in. On May 28, 1996, just a month after getting out of jail and burying the 2 young girls that he had held for an extended period of time, Marc was ready to find another victim. He kidnapped a 12-year-old girl named Sabine Dardenne as she rode her bicycle to school. During her time with Dutroux at the Marcinelle home, he repeatedly assaulted her and also starved her. It almost seems like he got some sort of perverse pleasure out of depriving her of food, leading one to wonder if he had done the same intentionally to Lejeune and Russo, so that when he was arrested and sent to jail, he would derive some sick satisfaction knowing that they were suffering. With Dardenne still held hostage, Dutroux and his accomplice, Michel Lelever, came across a 14-year-old girl named Laetitia Delhez as she walked home in the town of Bertrix on August 13, 1996. Luckily, a witness was able to write down the license plate of the car that they drove off in, and police tracked the 2 men down. That same day, they were arrested, and after 2 days, they both confessed and led authorities to the dungeon where Dardenne and Delhez were still locked up. It is concerning that the police were not able to find the girls without the creature's help, seeing as they must have known of the houses that he owned and his history of similar crimes. After rescuing the girls, they searched the home and found a treasure trove of evidence. In addition to a collection of adult films, there was a large stash of homemade films that Dutroux had made of him and his accomplices mistreating and assaulting their victims. Almost immediately, there was a public outcry over the crimes that had been allowed to take place while Dutroux should still have been locked up for his crimes in the 1980s. Dutroux also led police to the bodies that he had buried, likely because once investigators watched his disgusting videos, they would see the missing girls that were buried in the yard and find them anyway. This way, he could score some points for leniency at trial for cooperating. On August 17th, Dutroux helped police dig up Lejeune and Rousseau. But the evil psychopaths initially claimed to have let Lambrix and Marcinelle go free. However, investigators now knew that there could be bodies buried anywhere on the properties owned by Dutroux, and their searching paid off on September 3, 1996, when they found the girls' bodies. It was discovered that Dutroux's own mother had written a letter to police telling them that her son was holding girls captive in his home, but it had not been investigated. He had also been considered a prime suspect in the disappearance of Rousseau and Lejeune, but his properties had not been searched during the 14 months that they had been missing. Police had gone to Marc's home, but it seems they did little, if anything, more than asking him if he was involved. The first judge assigned to the case was a man named Jean-Marc Dutroux, and things seemed promising. He appeared eager to get to the bottom of Dutroux's tangled web of perversion and had immense empathy for the victims and their families. But this would be his downfall. On September 21st, he, his wife, and son briefly visited a benefit event for the grieving families. Attendees received either a pen or a bouquet of flowers, and during the hour they were at the event, the judge did not interact directly with any of the family members or Sabine Dardenne, who was there. Still, this was enough for someone in the government to get him out of the way. On October 15th, Dutroux was removed from the case for accepting gifts related to the pen and the bouquet of flowers that his wife had received. Needless to say, this move outraged Belgians who saw him as their best chance to pull on every thread of the case. On October 20th, 1996, as many as 300,000 people showed up in Brussels to protest the police who had failed to protect their children from Dutroux and show their anger at his crimes. The event was called the White March, using the color as a symbol of hope, which had started as a tradition in Belgium when Queen Fabiola wore white to her husband's funeral in 1993. People carried flags saying that they were ashamed to be from Belgium, white balloons, and some even painted their faces white to show solidarity with the victims' families. It was not only everyday citizens who were involved in the protest either. Fire brigades blasted government buildings with their fire hoses to symbolically cleanse them. To make matters worse, some of the videotapes that had been recovered disappeared, leading to the question of other unknown accomplices, possibly involved in law enforcement or government, especially after the investigator in charge of the search was promoted. Though incarcerated, Dutroux did not give up. While in a library reviewing the evidence against him, which already seems questionable, he was able to escape briefly, leading to multiple resignations on the police force. Yet another aspect that raises suspicions about the case is that one of the new judges refused to have the hair that was discovered in the dungeon tested for DNA, as if he was protecting someone. In 1998, a report came out saying that there was no conspiracy protecting the creature and his crew, but instead he was able to get away with his crimes for so long due to ineptitude and corruption that allowed payoffs and faulty investigations to prevent his discovery and the rescue of his victims. All the while, Dutroux claimed that he was simply a low-level member in a large and powerful network of child abusers and denied that he had any part in the deaths of anyone despite confessing to burying Weinstein alive. According to him, he simply managed the dungeon used by the organization. But Michel Martin painted a different picture, placing him squarely as the kidnapper and mastermind of the group of creeps, and that he had told her this was his plan as early as 1985. The trial began on March 1, 2004, more than 7 years after Dutroux's arrest in Arlon, the capital of the province where the investigation had started. Hundreds of people were called to testify against Dutroux for the variety of crimes that he was charged with, including auto theft, kidnapping, attempted homicide, and assaults against women unrelated to the kidnappings. Michel Martin and a wealthy businessman named Michel Nahoul were charged as accomplices. The public sentiment against Dutroux had not calmed down, and you can see the bulletproof vest that Dutroux was forced to wear to protect him from an outraged public, and during the trial he would be sat in a protective glass case. Unfortunately, the death penalty had been abolished in Belgium in 1996, and as is the case in many countries, the maximum sentence seemed drastically low given the crimes. On June 22, 2004, Dutroux received life in prison. Michel Martin got 30 years, and Lelever got only 25. The jury was not able to come to a conclusion regarding Nahul, and he would instead receive only 5 years for drug-related offenses. Shockingly, Martin is already free after serving only 16 years, despite protests demanding that she remain in custody. Initially, after leaving prison, she was housed in a convent, but when it closed down, a former judge allowed her to live with him, which is questionable. In 2012, Dutroux petitioned the court for early release, claiming that he was no longer dangerous to the public from his isolation cell. Thankfully, this request was ignored, but in 2019, Dutroux was granted a psychiatric evaluation, which is one of the first steps in the parole process. Belgium allows parole for prisoners serving a life sentence if they are deemed to be no longer a threat to society. However, thousands of people signed a petition to keep him locked up, and so these initial attempts at freedom failed. I don't think they should even be considered. While Dutroux did not get out of prison in 2019, Michel Lelever did, and you can see he's not exactly been welcomed back into society. Now for the conspiracies which have already raised their head in this video, with strange occurrences popping up throughout the case. A letter was discovered in Weinstein's home which referenced a gift to what it referred to as the High Priestess, with the author signing his name as Anubis. These aliases were a possible link to a cult in Charleroi that used similar terms, but no other connection was found when the cult headquarters was raided. There are also the videos which went missing that some authorities have said included footage of government officials. Then the question of how Dutroux amassed his wealth, which included as many as 10 homes, along with the equivalent of $130,000 in cash. WikiLeaks would publish documents showing large deposits of money into Michel Martin's bank account, leading some to speculate that someone else was financing the operation. There is even an investigation related to the case, referred to as the X-Files, because the victims were given code names starting with X. Many of these victims and witnesses described horrific crimes that did not come up in the trial. One of the strangest aspects in the Dutroux case is the large number of people who passed away before they could testify against him, which some put as high as 20. To me, the most damning evidence of a conspiracy is the 25 hair samples found in the dungeon that were not tested, which seems to be an effort to protect someone involved in the evil activities of Marc Dutroux. But it does not seem likely that the truth will ever come out, and the best we can hope for is for the creature to never be released, and for the others involved to be closely monitored for the rest of their lives.